Today, I'm going to take out my new kayak on a solo spearfishing mission, where I'm going to dive some beautiful drop-offs, smash some invasive fish, and search the reef for some beautiful, giant, underwater monsters. Enjoy. I got to the boat launch nice and early, and I prepared my kayak for its maiden voyage. After a couple minutes of paddling, I was a quarter mile offshore, and I was super happy to see that my kayak was still floating. I had picked this thing up for cheap on Marketplace with a hole in it, but it seems like my patch job is holding, so I'm gonna jump in and check out the water. It was a little scary not being able to see anything, and was more than a little bit disorientating. This was my first time being in water where it was too deep to see the bottom. I paddled for a bit, then jumped in again, and this time I was perfectly over the shelf. On my first drop of the day, I stopped right before I hit the bottom at 40 feet and turned right around to the surface. I wasn't feeling great on this first dive, but it was just a warm-up, so I wasn't worried. I moved into a slightly shallower zone and decided to warm up by taking down some roy. This one wanted to play peekaboo, but there was no way I was going to let that slide. I spotted this crazy looking arch from the surface, and I decided to dive down to see if anyone was home. As I neared the bottom, I saw this massive head turn to look at me. This Alua was huge, and he seemed completely unbothered by me. I line up my gun here, and he gives me a broadside shot before deciding to dip out the back exit of this cave. There's a chance I could have got him there, but I wanted to make sure my shot was absolutely perfect. The last time I shot an Alua, it stopped my line and took off into the depths. After seeing that Alua, I decided to paddle out into a little bit deeper water where I saw this little roy swimming around. He did some pretty crazy evasive maneuvers swimming through these caves here, but then he just stops and gives me an easy shot. After braining that roy, I reloaded my gun, and that's when I suddenly saw these two big fish swimming below me. I took a dive down, and I'm doing my best to kind of sneak up on these guys. Of course they know I'm here, but I'm just moving slowly and trying to refrain from any sudden movements. I do a couple grunts, and I'm hoping they'll turn back towards me. And it looks like this one thinks about it, and I can almost take the shot here, but I just couldn't quite get the right angle. There's a good chance I could have landed that fish from that angle, but I didn't want to risk it and potentially injure the fish for nothing. Those two kahalas swam off along the shelf, and I was more excited than ever to be out here. That was my first time ever seeing two kahalas like that. I want them to come back in, so I decided to chum up the roy that I just shot, and then I dove down to investigate. When I hit the bottom at about 42 feet, I immediately started doing some grunts. I didn't see any kahala, but what I did see was even more interesting. I decided to swing my gun around so it's facing the right direction, because swimming right off of the shelf is a little uku. I do some more grunts. I'm trying to tempt him in, and he gets a little curious here and starts charging right at me, but he turns around way before he gets in range. I keep my gun pointed at him for a little bit, but I'm out of air, and he's out of curiosity. I haven't given up yet, so as soon as I get to the surface, I breathe up and take another drop. I was planning on landing right on the underside of this ledge here, but clearly that space is already occupied, and this guy does not look like he wants to share. I swim to the side, and the whole time I keep my gun trained on this guy. I've definitely heard some horror stories about these things. If you think sharks are scary, you should see these moray eels. They're much more likely to attack you too. At least that's what I think. I look around and do some grunts, but I don't see any uku. This roy and the eel both come back up for a peek, but I'm done playing around. I smashed this roy, and luckily that eel cruised right back into his cave and didn't come after me. It was kind of a silly decision to shoot that roy right next to that eel, but luckily it worked out for me. This was the last eventful dive of the day, but I was back on my kayak a couple days later. I'm gonna gear up, and I've seen some big uku out here, some big amberjacks, so hopefully we can get lucky today. It's a brand new day. I jump in the water, load up my gun, and immediately see an amberjack swimming below me. I dive down on him, and after a minute I spot a second one swimming next to him. These are the exact same fish that I had seen a couple days before. I do a couple grunts and I swim slowly, keeping my gun trained at them. They turn in front of me and line up for a shot. I smash this guy right through the gills, and the blood in the water shows it was a perfect shot. I'm so stoked to have hit this guy. It's my first time ever shooting at a kahala. It seems like he's pretty much out of energy, so I start to reel him in nice and slow. As I start to pull him in, he gets some water through his gills and the shock wears off. He starts swimming hard, battling me as much as he can, but it's just no use. My shot placement was too good, and I'm able to pull him in slowly, hand over hand. When I grab his tail, he shows me that he's got a lot of energy left, but the fight is pretty much over. I get my hands up into his gills, and the only thing left to do is brain this beautiful fish. This is such a gorgeous animal. I really just have to take a second to revel and admire it. Even though I've already got dinner, I just got out here, so I still want to take a couple drops. I get down to the bottom here, do some grunts, and immediately I see an uku swimming around here. This might have been the same exact uku from the other day, but I didn't have any more luck on this one. Immediately I have to head back up to the surface because I'm not dealing with this pressure well. That thing was kind of gnarly for a warm-up drop. After breathing up for a little bit, I hit the bottom again at about 50 feet. I start looking around and I see the school of invasive ta'ape swimming right at me. Then, all of a sudden, I see something peeking its head up from this coral. So I line up on it and smash him. He starts swimming around like crazy and I just see my line getting tangled everywhere. He goes into that cave and all that line just cinches up and my heart drops. I know it's going to be a pain in the ass to get this guy untangled, so I breathe up and dive down to give it my best shot. I try as hard as I can and I get absolutely nowhere. Time to go back up. After a while, I dive down again, and I think this is the dive where I really realized how much trouble I was in. This Roy had completely wrapped my line around this pillar of coral, and not just there, it was wrapped around everywhere on the reef. Again, I tried as hard as I could and headed back up to the surface. After another unsuccessful dive, I decided to detach my line from my gun and tried to pull it out by the butt end. I dove down again with the line detached, and it felt like I was making progress, but this was just an illusion. Eventually I realized there was no way I was going to get this line untangled, and I was forced to cut it at the spear. I really hate leaving plastic line down here on the bottom of the ocean like this, but I felt like I had no other choice. After 6 consecutive dives at 50 feet, I was just too fatigued to go on. I stuck my head out of the water at the surface, and this canoe almost hit me. You might think I'm being dramatic here, but they were 10 feet from me, and if that thing had hit me in the head, I could have passed out and drowned. Now I love the canoe club, but I had a float today, and these folks should have been watching out. Regardless, maybe that was just my punishment for leaving line on the bottom of the ocean. Even if I wanted to go on, I had no more shooting line, so it's time to just hang out on the kayak and admire my beautiful catch. I was still stoked, don't get me wrong, but it was a bummer to lose that line. I picked this kayak up a couple days earlier for cheap. It had a hole in the bottom that the last owner had tried to repair, but they had failed pretty miserably. I wasn't going to let that stop me from getting a good deal though. I took my $30 Amazon plastic welder and I got to work. The first thing I would do is melt the surface, and then I would melt my donor plastic, and once they were both nice and hot, I'd put them together and begin blending. This first little bit came out pretty nice, but I knew I had more work to do. I repeated those steps again, stacking more and more layers on top of each other until I was satisfied. This was the final result. I was definitely a little nervous taking it offshore for the first time, but luckily it held up. Thank you guys so much for watching the whole video. If you're not subscribed, please do so, and I'll see you all in the next one.